Welcome to I Love Apes. If you happen to be taking AP Environmental Science, you've come to the right place. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the relationships between species. It's pretty interesting stuff, so let's go ahead and get started. So here's the thing. Every organism out there has this unique set of physical and behavioral adaptations that it has evolved that allows it to successfully compete for resources in its environment. And by resources, we mean things like the food that it eats, where it nests, and things like that. So let's just take a look at these three I've chosen here. Okay, we'll start with jacana birds. Really cool. You can see these things in Belize and other tropical places. Look what they've got. They've got this bizarre large foot, these long fingers, and that allows them to walk out on lily pads and eat these little fish that live out there in the lily pads. Whereas a heron, which has these really long legs, a long neck, and a long beak, it's able to wade in fairly shallow but still deeper water than other fish and skewer these medium-sized fish with its beak. And then you've got osprey, which are like eagles, they're raptors, and they basically have adapted to have these very keen eyes. They can see fish from high up, and they can hit the water at very high velocities and catch fairly large fish and fly away with them. So they're all very different, right? So these adaptations allow each organism to outcompete any other species, which allows it to survive. And we say, therefore, that's allowing them to fill a particular niche in its ecosystem. So what exactly is a niche? It's a little bit difficult to describe, but think of it like it's just the role or job that an organism plays in its community of organisms. So it's basically, it comprises all of the biotic and abiotic factors that contribute to its success in the community, as well as its anatomical structures that it has evolved over time. So it's things like what it eats, how it gets its food, how it hunts, how it forages. Where does it live? Is it tropical? Is it evolved to hibernate in the tundra? So how is it adapted to a specific habitat or biome? And what other species does it interact with in terms of predator and prey, symbiotic relationships, and things like that? Well, what would happen if I had two organisms that were both adapted to the same niche and somehow they were put together? This results in a thing called the competitive exclusion principle, which is a pretty important idea in this unit. And basically what it tells us is that no two species can successfully occupy the same niche, that it just won't work out. And here's why. So let's just say I have these yellow birds that are adapted to filling this niche of this particular tree. And now for whatever reason, another species of bird is either introduced or migrates in because of climate change, but now it is also adapted to filling the same niche. So I have two competitors that are both adapted to the same niche and trying to extract the same resources from the same niche. It ain't gonna work. And what this tells us is no matter what, if that happens, one of the species will outcompete the other one. And what will happen is one of the species will go extinct in that ecosystem. Not globally extinct, but these red birds, they might live elsewhere in the world, but they ain't not going to live here because the yellow birds were a little bit better, or maybe a lot better, but even a little bit better at outcompeting the red bird for the resources in this niche. It was just better adapted. So that's competitive exclusion principle. Now, sometimes a different thing happens rather than competitive exclusion. For the same reason, we have two species trying to occupy the same niche. But what happens instead is something called resource partitioning. Now, here's what happens. So again, the birds move in, the red birds move in, and they're trying to compete with the yellow birds here. But sometimes what happens is the two species will alter their behaviors, and as a result, what will happen is that one species will occupy one part of the niche while the other species occupies the other part, and they're no longer directly in competition with each other. Now, it limits the amount of available niche space, if you will, feeding space, nesting space, whatever, but it does allow them both to be successfully staying in a particular area. Now, here's a classic example that was studied in the 1960s. It involves a particular type of sea anemone whose name I can't pronounce. I'm not even going to try, okay? So basically, I'm from the state of Washington. You go out on the rocks there, and you have these beautiful rocks out on this beautiful coast, and they're often just covered with anemones, which are little invertebrates that use their tentacles to grab fish out of the water. Now, they tend to live in the intertidal zone, so between high and low tide, and they cling to the rocks. So what we find is like if there was just this one particular, can't pronounce it, anemone present, this is what it would occupy. So this is where we would find it. Now, we're going to call that its fundamental niche. Without any competitor, this is where I would find it. But what happens is when you introduce this other one into the area, again, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, all right, the blue one. When you introduce the blue one, what happens is it's a little bit better at occupying the part of the area that stays underwater more often, whereas this one here, the brown one, is better adapted to being out of the water for longer periods of time. So it outcompetes this one in this region, whereas this one outcompetes it in this region, and they end up sharing this. So both of these could fill this entire fundamental niche, but then what we end up with is this resource partitioning. And one thing you might have noticed between the tree and the rocks is resource partitioning is often vertical. It can also be temporal. It can also be time. Like certain birds come out at night to feed on insects, and then when it gets or in the evening, and then the bats come out at night to feed on the same insect. So you can have it be non-spatial. It can also be temporal. So the realized niche is where we actually find the organisms, whereas the fundamental is what they are adapted to fill. Now, let's talk about the relationships between species. So when we talk about the relationships between species, one way we can indicate the type of relationship is using a positive sign to say, well, it's beneficial for the species. So when these two species interact, if it's good for one of them, I'm going to use a plus sign. If it's harmful to one of them, I'm going to use a negative sign. And if it's meh, it doesn't really affect one of them, I'll use a little zero symbol, okay? So let's just take a look at the different types of species relationships that College Board wants you to know about. Well, let's just start with this one here, okay? So without even identifying the type, we'll just say, look, I've got a cheetah and I got a gazelle. Here's what I'm noticing. It's pretty good for the cheetah, right? The cheetah's getting dinner tonight. It's not so great for the gazelle because the gazelle's not getting breakfast tomorrow or any day after that. So it was good for one. It was not good for the other one. Now, let's look at the different types. Okay, so we're going to start with competition. So competition is a type of relationship. So by competing for access for the same resource, both species, let's say they engage in resource partitioning, they still have less food available to them. They have less nest space available to them. So it turns out it's, if I got these two monkeys trying to compete for the same banana space, it's going to be worse for both of them. It's going to keep both of them from having a population as high as it otherwise would be. They're surviving, but their numbers aren't as big as it would be. So this competition is bad for both of them. Predation is what we already looked at before. So a predator-prey relationship definitely has a very powerful impact on ecosystems. It's the main one that we really concern ourselves with because predators limit the population size of herbivores, and then herbivores have other effects on ecosystems, so it's super important. Now, it should be pretty obvious that if I look at the wolves and I look at the elk, it's pretty good for the wolves, and it's not so great for the elk. All right? Now, the truth is, in the absence of wolves, the population of elk can get so large that there's other problems. So this is a little bit oversimplified, but we're just going to keep it simple for today. Herbivory, that means engaging in eating plants. So herbivores are really important in ecosystems for a number of reasons. We'll talk about a lot this year, but basically they are the first consumers. They take this NPP that the plants produce and they make it available to everyone else in the ecosystem. They usually have a special adaptation within their gut that allows them to eat plants because most things can't eat them directly. And then these herbivores often shape an ecosystem by preventing certain plants from growing, by distributing seeds, by distributing nutrients. So herbivory is a really important relationship in an ecosystem. So here I have a bison, and here I have a giraffe. Then both of them are engaging in herbivory. So it's good for the herbivore, and it's not necessarily that great for the plants it's eating. But the truth is, the plants in most cases do survive. Like, it is possible to overgraze and have it really be negative, but in most cases, it's really not so bad for the ecosystem overall. Now we get to the really interesting one, that's symbiosis. So symbiosis basically means it's an ecological interaction where these two species have evolved in such a way that at least one of the two species, and often both, depend on the other one for survival. Without it, it can't survive. So it usually involves evolutionary changes that happen over time. So coevolution, they evolve together. And usually one or both of them will benefit from this interaction. So it takes three different forms, okay? So we have mutualism, parasitism, and commensalism. Let's look at all three of them, starting with mutualism. Okay, so mutualism is when both species benefit from the interaction, so they're both happy, all right? So basically what it means is the two species evolve together in such a way that they're both benefiting from this. Often they can't survive without each other. That one of them goes extinct, the other one will too, because they can't live without each other. There's quite a few examples of this. So anemones with clownfish. So here you go, you have an anemone here. So these anemones have stinging cells they use to kill fish, but this fish happens to be immune to it. Now what happens is it can hide in here, so its predators can't get at it because they would get stung by the anemone. But what this does is it also eats the little things, the little mites and things, the little parasites that might live on the anemone. So they're both benefiting from this. Also, too, this acts as a lure that brings in other fish that want to eat it, and then this eats them. So it's good for both of them. A classic and super important one I'm sure you've heard about is pollinators like bees and flowers. So basically the flower provides nectar that the bee consumes, and that's what it uses to feed its population. But in the process, it picks up the pollen from the plant and carries it to other plants. So without the bees, they can't reproduce, and without the flowers, the bees can't eat. So it benefits them both. And the last one we'll talk about is oxpeckers. It's a kind of bird that lives on grazing animals in Africa. What it does, it eats the parasites off that, so that's good for the zebra and it's good for the oxpecker. And the other thing is, if something comes that's particularly startling, like a lion, the oxpeckers have a tendency to take flight, and that gives a warning signal to the zebra. So it's mutually beneficial. Then there's parasitism. Ugh, parasitism is so awful. Okay, basically, obviously one benefits and the other one doesn't. Okay, so basically a parasitic relationship is one in which the parasite benefits, the host, we call it, is harmed. So the host is the thing that's being harmed by the parasite. Sometimes, but not always, the parasite actually lives on the host. Sometimes it simply extracts food from the host. Or nest space from the host. So there's so many parasites in the world. Oh my gosh, and they're all so horrible. Let's just look at a couple of them. Ticks. So ticks basically, they're like a type of mite, and they bury their heads into the skin of other organisms, and they drink their blood. And they're definitely not good for the thing. Not only are they uncomfortable, and not only are they extracting blood, they often carry diseases that will then be very detrimental to the host. Mosquitoes, same, except mosquitoes don't live on their host. They feed and leave, but they're similar to ticks in the same regard, that they're drinking the blood and they tend to pass on blood-borne pathogens. But then you got like vampire bats. I don't know if you can see it. There's like a little bit of blood here. These are South American devils, and they feed on mammals, including you, if you don't keep your windows closed. And again, they transmit disease, and they can extract significantly more blood than the tick or mosquito could. And then you've got intestinal worms. They're the worst. They live in the host. Like so many organisms in nature have these worms living in their intestines. Just be glad you live when you live, so you don't have to live that way. But obviously, this is good for the tick, the vampire bat, and the worm, but it is not good for the things that they're feeding on. And now we have commensalism. So commensalism is basically one benefits and the other one is not affected. So what do you have? Like, okay, so one's happy, one don't really care. So let's just look at some examples. Cattle egrets, orchids, and remorse. So let's start with cattle egrets. Cattle egrets, so here's what happens. They're not eating the bugs that on the water buffalo here. So they're not really benefiting it. But what happens is when this buffalo walks through the grass, it scares up bugs, which this then eats. So the egret is definitely getting a benefit. It's also getting a perch where it can see the bugs from. But the other guy, it doesn't hurt him. It doesn't really seem to have any negative effect on him or positive effect on him. Then we have orchids, which everybody loves because they're so beautiful. Well, orchids are what are known as air plants. Really what they are is epiphytic plants, plants that live on other plants. They don't harm the host plant. They just take up residency on it. They just live there to get them above the forest floor, but they don't hurt the tree at all. But without the tree, the orchid can't exist. So the tree is helping the orchid isn't helping or hurting the tree. And then you've got remora. Remora are so cool. I've had one try to stick to me before when I was in Indonesia. It's kind of freaky. They're basically shark-like fish, elasmobranchs, that have this little sucker appendage on the top of their head that lets them stick themselves onto sharks and other animals, including people sometimes. And basically, the shark isn't bothered by them. You'd think they would be, but nobody can seem to see like any harm happening to the shark. What happens is when the shark feeds, these little rascals let go and they eat the little leftovers that the shark hasn't gotten to and the shark isn't going to get to. So they're not taking food away from the shark, but they are providing food for the remoras. So that's basically the different types of relationships you've got to be aware of in apes. Hey, thanks for watching. Listen, if you found this video to be useful at all, I would appreciate if you go ahead and give it a like. If there's something you want to tell me, some kind of feedback or some video you'd like me to make, go ahead and put that in the comments section for me. Be sure to check the description below. I often post the PDF of the document that I use, also practice problems and so on that can help you do better on your AP test. And of course, you know what's coming. More than anything else, what I really need you to do is hit that subscribe button.